The Traitor's Gauntlet, Elite versus Veteran. The House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing room hummed with that peculiar, electric energy of a political spectacle about to careen violently off the rails. 3 C-SPAN cameras, their red recording lights glowing like the predatory eyes of a jungle cat, were strategically positioned to capture every facial micro-expression. The gallery was a packed, simmering pot of partisan fervor. Activists from both ideological extremes. Journalists with laptops open and fingers poised to capture the moment of political death. And congressional staffers ready to tweet the winning blow before the victim even hit the floor. At the witness table sat Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. At 42, she had become a master of political iconography, using every element of her appearance as a carefully crafted piece of political armor. She adjusted her burgundy hijab with a practiced, immaculate precision, not a fold out of place. Her makeup was flawless, her dark blazer impeccably tailored. She projected the image of a serious, unassailable progressive legislator, confident, prepared, and ready to dominate the narrative. The committee chairman, a moderate Democrat, was mid-review of his notes when the door opened. Former Representative Tulsi Gabbard entered, now serving as a ranking member on special assignment. Gabbard moved with a bearing that 3 decades of martial arts training and military service had permanently instilled. Shoulders back, spine straight, each step measured and deliberate. Her simple navy suit was strictly off the rack, functional rather than fashionable. She carried a weathered brown briefcase that looked like it had survived deployments overseas. A stark contrast to the luxurious presentation of the woman across the table. Omar's eyes tracked Gabbard's approach. A flicker, was it recognition? Anticipation? Crossed her face? Before Gabbard could even pull out her chair, Omar leaned forward to her microphone. "Mr. Chairman," her voice cut through the room, sharp and clear, "before we hear from the representative from Hawaii, I want to remind this committee about her problematic history." Gabbard paused, briefcase still in hand, looking at Omar with an expression of almost serene curiosity. She said nothing, offering no fight, just waiting. Omar, warming to her prepared topic, her voice rising with indignation, launched the offensive. Representative Gabbard has a documented record of betraying refugees. She visited Syria and met with Assad, a dictator who has killed hundreds of thousands of his own people. She appears regularly on Fox News to peddle right-wing talking points. She's attacked Muslims, immigrants, and asylum seekers. A few young progressive activists in the gallery, wearing keffiyehs and Justice for Palestine buttons, applauded weakly. Someone shouted, "Tell her, Ilhan, she's an Islamophobe." Omar seized the moment, her finger now pointing at Gabbard like a weapon. The ultimate rhetorical escalation. She's a traitor to immigrants, to Muslims, to everyone who came to this country seeking a better life. The word traitor hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Gabbard finally moved. She set her briefcase on the table with a soft, decisive thud that somehow cut through the room's noise. She pulled out her chair, sat down with deliberate slowness, and folded her hands on the table. Her face registered no anger, no defensiveness, the profound calm of someone who had faced far graver threats than a political accusation. "Thank you for that introduction, Congresswoman Omar," Gabbard said, her voice carrying the calm of controlled power. "I understand you're passionate about these issues." She paused, and in that vacuum, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. "But since you've questioned my integrity, my loyalty, and my commitment to the values I've sworn to uphold." Gabbard's hands moved to the briefcase clasps. The click of the twin locks opening sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. "Perhaps we should examine yours." The briefcase lid lifted. Inside were folders, many folders, with color-coded tabs, documents bearing official seals visible even from a distance. Gabbard pulled out the first one, a manila folder with a bright red tab. "Mr. Chairman, I have evidence relevant to this committee's work. Evidence regarding Congresswoman Omar's own record, her integrity, her honesty, her loyalty." She opened the folder and placed a document on the overhead projector. The image flared onto the large screen behind them, crisp and undeniable. It was a marriage certificate. State of Minnesota, Certificate of Marriage. Date: February 12, 2009. Bride: Ilhan Abdullahi Omar. Groom. Ahmed Noor said Elmi. Omar's hand, reaching for her water glass, froze mid-motion. Her eyes went wide for a critical fraction of a second beat before she desperately tried to mask her shock with defiance. That moment, the visceral, unscripted admission of surprise, was captured by every camera in the room. "Let's start with this," Gabbard said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. "Your marriage to Ahmed Noor said Elmi in 2009. The room erupted. Journalists began typing furiously. Republican committee members leaned forward with predatory interest. Democratic members exchanged deeply uncomfortable glances. In the gallery, Omar's supporters looked utterly confused. This was not the choreographed script they had paid to see. Omar recovered quickly, her voice straining toward a shout. "This is racist. This is Islamophobic. You're trafficking in debunked right-wing conspiracy theories." "Have they been debunked?" Gabbard countered, still seated, still radiating calm. "Then perhaps you can help us understand. Why did you marry Ahmed Noor?" said Elmi. "That's my private business. You made it public business when you became a public official." Gabbard interrupted gently. "When you accepted campaign donations based on your story. When you took an oath of office. Nothing about your official conduct is private anymore." The political stage had been abruptly cleared. The fight was no longer about abstract foreign policy or the politics of identity. It was about documented, personal integrity. The public service she was paid to perform was now on trial. Judged by her own documents. Gabbard pulled out another document. Then another. A small, ominous stack began to form. "I have 47 documents here. Congresswoman," she said, her voice a relentless surgical tool. "Marriage certificates, birth records, immigration files, school enrollment records, tax returns, campaign finance reports, each one raising questions that you've never adequately answered. Are we allowing this harassment, this racist interrogation?" Omar pleaded to the chairman. The chairman, clearly a party man, looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Representative Gabbard, what is the relevance?" "The relevance, Mr. Chairman, is trust," Gabbard said, her voice steady, almost gentle, which made it more devastating than any shout. "Can the American people trust what Congresswoman Omar tells them? Can we trust her sworn statements? Can we trust her financial disclosures? Can we trust her when she takes an oath of office? These documents suggest we cannot. I will not sit here and be attacked." Omar's voice was now verging on shrill. "This is a witch hunt. A lynching." Several Democratic members visibly winced at her extreme word choice. They were now calculating the political cost of her defense. Gabbard finally stood, though not tall. Her military bearing filled the space. "Congresswoman Omar, you called me a traitor. You questioned my loyalty. You attacked my integrity." She gestured to the stack of documents. "I'm simply asking you to answer questions about yours. If these allegations are false, prove it. Release your immigration records. Provide DNA evidence. Explain the discrepancies. Clear your name." Omar's mouth opened, then closed, a rare moment of being utterly speechless. Gabbard reached into her briefcase again, pulling out a thicker folder. This one had a blue tab. "But perhaps we should start with something simpler. Something that's not alleged. Something that's been proven." She placed a new document on the projector. Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board Findings and Order. Date: June 6, 2019. Representative Ilhan Omar. Violation found. The words appeared on the screen in official, undeniable government typeface, establishing the cold, hard fact. "You were found guilty of campaign finance violations," Gabbard said simply, "by your own state's ethics board. Shall we discuss that?" Omar sank back into her chair. Her hand was now visibly shaking as she brought the water glass to her lips. In the gallery, her supporters were checking their phones. The frantic search for a debunking link already underway. Gabbard sat back down, opened the folder fully, and prepared the final surgical cut. "Let's begin with the marriage. Specifically, let's discuss who Ahmed Noor said Elmi is and why you married him. The brother-husband theory, birth certificates and immigration fraud." Omar closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, and in that brief vulnerability, she looked not like a powerful congresswoman but like someone who knew her carefully constructed world was about to collapse under the weight of paper. The cameras, relentless in their pursuit of the truth, captured every flicker of her fear. The projector screen flickered as Gabbard placed a new, pivotal document. This one was different, older, slightly faded, bearing the official seals of the British government, United Kingdom. Certificate of birth, registration district, London. Name: Ahmed Noor Sahed Elmi. Date of birth: June 13, 1985. Father: Noor Sahed Elmi Muhammad. Mother: Faduma Abubakar Hussein. This is Ahmed Elmi's birth certificate, Gabbard explained, her voice taking on the measured, irrefutable tone of a prosecutor building a case brick by brick. Registered with the UK Home Office when his family was granted asylum in Britain. Note the parents' names. She then placed a second document next to it. The juxtaposition, a devastating visual comparison. United States Citizenship and Immigration Services Certificate of Naturalization. Name: Ilhan Abdullahi Omar. Date: 2000. Parents: Noor Sahed Elmi Muhammad, Faduma Abubakar Hussein. The names were identical. The gasp that rippled through the gallery was loud and visceral. Even some of the Democratic committee members leaned forward, squinting at the screen, struggling to reconcile the impossible familial connection with the legal documents of marriage. Same father, same mother, Gabbard stated quietly, the soft delivery only amplifying the shocking implication. Born in the same city. Both came to the West as refugees from Somalia. Omar shot to her feet, her voice sharp with panic-fueled outrage. This is racist. You're trying to police Somali naming customs. In our culture, people often have similar names. This proves nothing. Gabbard met the challenge head-on, returning the focus to documented fact. Then prove it, she replied, still seated, still calm. Take a DNA test with Ahmed Elmi. Prove you're not biologically related. You've had years to do this. Multiple journalists have offered to pay for it. Why haven't you? The demand for a DNA test was a brilliant political maneuver. It stripped Omar of her victimhood defense and shifted the burden of proof entirely onto her. By refusing, she tacitly validated the central accusation. Because I don't have to prove anything to racist conspiracy theorists, Omar declared. You're a United States Congresswoman, Gabbard countered, and now a sharp edge finally entered her voice. You took an oath of office. You receive a security clearance. You have access to classified national security information. The American people have every right to know if you committed immigration fraud to bring a family member into this country illegally. She pulled out more documents, the stack growing into an imposing monument of bureaucratic evidence. The focus now shifted to motive, the why behind the alleged fraud. A new slide appeared, timeline and motive analysis. Let's discuss motive, Gabbard said. Why would someone commit immigration fraud? Why would someone marry a family member? She brought up the analysis. Ahmed Elmi was a British citizen. It is notoriously difficult for British citizens to immigrate to the US without special circumstances. But marriage to a US citizen? That's a direct pathway that gets you a visa. That gets you in-state tuition at universities. That gets you federal student aid. A devastating piece of financial evidence appeared next. Student loan records for Ahmed Elmi. $47 in federal student loans. But look at the FOFSA filing, Gabbard said, highlighting a section. Filed as independent student. No parental income reported. Qualified for maximum aid. If you're filing as independent, you need to prove you're not a dependent. Marriage does that. Convenient, isn't it? The analysis was chillingly simple. The marriage may have been a financial and immigration maneuver from the beginning, designed to exploit two separate government systems simultaneously. But here's where it gets interesting. Gabbard continued, pulling out more tax documents. While Elmi was receiving student aid based on being married to you, you were filing your FOFSA as unmarried. You claimed you had no spouse. You reported only your own income. That qualified you for aid based on lower household income. Gabbard looked directly at Omar. The ultimate contradiction laid bare. You can't have it both ways. Either you were married or you weren't. One of you at minimum committed student aid fraud. Maybe both. Representative Ted Deutsch from Florida, a moderate Democrat, finally spoke up, clearly uncomfortable. Representative Gabbard, these are very serious allegations. Do you have evidence that charges have been filed? No charges have been filed. Gabbard acknowledged, pausing dramatically. Despite multiple complaints to federal authorities. Despite clear discrepancies in public records. Despite sworn statements under oath that contradict photographic evidence. She paused again, driving the stake home, which raises its own questions about why no investigation has occurred. Doesn't it? She returned her focus to Omar. But I'm not here to file charges. I'm here because you questioned my integrity, my loyalty, my service to the principles I swore to uphold. So, I'm asking you, Congresswoman, what about yours? Omar's aide, leaning forward to whisper urgently, was frantically dismissed. Omar violently shook her head, the nervous gesture causing her hijab to slip slightly. No longer perfectly arranged, the political armor was beginning to crack. The truth of the documents was proving too heavy for the shield of political deflection to bear. The tangled web, the separation lie and the tax fraud prelude. Gabbard reached for another folder. The blue tabbed folder now opened fully, revealing the internal mechanics of the alleged deception. This section focused on the lie of separation, the direct contradiction between Omar's sworn legal statements and the mundane physical evidence of her daily life. The timeline, professionally made and color-coded, was already displayed for the committee to absorb. 2002. Ilhan Omar enters religious marriage with Ahmed Hirsi, not legally recognized. 2009. February, Omar legally marries Ahmed Noor Sahed Elmi. 2017. August, Omar files for divorce from Elmi, claiming no contact since 2011, and that his location is unknown. Let me summarize, Gabbard announced, using a laser pointer to highlight the key contradiction. You married Ahmed Elmi in 2009. Then you claimed in sworn divorce documents that you hadn't had contact with him since 2011. You legally stated he was unreachable. She clicked to a new image. A photograph slightly grainy but devastatingly clear. It showed a hospital room. A young woman, Omar, holding a newborn. Exhausted but smiling. Next to her stood a young man, Elmi, holding the baby with obvious affection. The date stamp read the 12th of June 2012. This photo was posted on Ahmed Elmi's Instagram account. Gabbard stated, her voice quiet but carrying the force of a battering ram. That's him holding your newborn baby in a Minneapolis hospital in 2012, 1 year after you claimed you lost contact with him. Omar's face was now pale. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. The physical reaction a mirror of the internal collapse. That photo is taken out of context. She protested, her voice weak. Context, Gabbard repeated, pulling out another document. Let's talk about context. The new image was an eviction notice from July 31, 2012. This is an eviction notice served to Ahmed Noor Sahed Elmi at 3232 Bloomington Avenue, Minneapolis. That address is exactly 2.3 miles, a 10-minute drive, from your residence at the time. The notice was served in person. Elmi signed for it. The image of Elmi's signature, clearly visible, hung on the screen. So, he wasn't in London, was he? Gabbard asked. He was in Minneapolis, living 10 minutes from you, while you were supposedly separated, while he was supposedly unreachable and his location was unknown. Why would you lie about that in your divorce papers? The room was completely silent. Even the most vocal supporters in the gallery were staring at the documents with growing, troubled unease. Why claim he was in London when he was actually in Minneapolis? Gabbard continued, delivering the inescapable conclusion. Unless you needed to hide the fact that you'd been living together. That the marriage wasn't a real marriage in the traditional sense. That it was something else, a mechanism for immigration and financial gain. This is insane. Omar tried again, but the strength had left her voice. You're suggesting I committed immigration fraud based on names, photos, addresses. I'm not suggesting anything, Gabbard replied. The epitome of controlled precision. I'm presenting publicly available documents and asking you, the congresswoman who called me a traitor, to explain them. I'm simply asking, what should we call someone who potentially defrauded the U.S. immigration system? Gabbard pulled out a thick binder, at least 100 pages, containing archived evidence, witness statements, neighbor testimony, and archived social media posts. This is from a former classmate at North Dakota State University, NDSU, I remember them both from the same building. They were clearly related. They looked similar, had the same mannerisms. Everyone assumed they were siblings. It was weird when we found out years later that they'd been married. This is from a neighbor in Minneapolis. I'd see them together sometimes. They acted like family, not like a married couple. The way siblings act around each other. Hearsay. Rumors. None of this is proof. Omar protested, adjusting her hijab with a nervous, shaking hand. You're right. Gabbard agreed calmly, which is why I'm asking you to provide proof to the contrary. DNA test. Immigration records. Anything that definitively shows you and Ahmed Elmi are not biologically related. Omar sat back down heavily. The fabric of her hijab had begun to slip. A visual metaphor for the unraveling of her carefully constructed political persona. The weight of the contradiction, the hospital photo, the eviction notice, the twin birth certificates, was crushing. The meticulous timeline revealed a pattern. The legal marriage was a utility. And the official separation was a lie. All serving to hide the true, illicit nature of the arrangement. This wasn't just political gaffery, it was a deliberate, documented, multi-year attempt to subvert U.S. law for personal gain. Bigamy and consciousness of guilt. The tax fraud and amended returns. The inquiry now reached its financial and criminal climax, moving from the alleged immigration fraud to the certain tax fraud that arose from the confusion of her multiple marital claims. Gabbard placed a new document on the projector, the focus shifting to the ultimate violation of civic trust, defrauding the American taxpayer. The document was a U.S. individual income tax return, Form 1040, year 2014. Filing status: married, filing jointly. Taxpayer: Ilhan Omar. Spouse: Ahmed Hirsi. The timing was the hammer blow. You filed joint federal tax returns in 2014 and 2015. Gabbard said, her voice now cold with prosecutorial precision. With Ahmed Hirsi, a man you were not legally married to, because you were legally married to Ahmed Elmi from 2009 to 2017. Gabbard let the stunning contradiction, legally married to one man, filing taxes with another, sink in. Minnesota doesn't recognize common law marriage. To file jointly under federal law, you must be legally married. You weren't, not to Hirsi. You were married to Elmi. The financial motivation was exposed. Let's do the math, Gabbard continued, pulling out a calculator with a gesture that was now pure theater. Filing jointly versus filing as single. 2014. Approximately $4 in tax savings. 2015. Approximately $4.500 in savings. Total. About $8.500 in tax benefits you weren't entitled to. Gabbard looked at Omar directly, driving home the moral failure. You defrauded the federal government, the American taxpayers, of $8.500. While you were married to one man, you claimed marriage to another, to pay less in taxes. Omar's defense, desperate and grasping, finally surfaced. I filed amended returns. My accountant corrected it. In 2016, Gabbard noted, cutting her off, after the Campaign Finance Board investigation started looking into your finances. After questions were being raised, you amended 3-year-old tax returns to cover your tracks. Gabbard pulled out a legal opinion. I consulted with former IRS prosecutors. They tell me that amending returns after an investigation begins doesn't eliminate the crime. It just shows consciousness of guilt. The term, heavy with criminal implication, echoed in the silent chamber. You knew what you'd done was wrong, so you tried to fix it before you got caught. Gabbard placed her hands flat on the table, emphasizing the gravity of the total picture. But here's what really interests me. Why file jointly with Hirsi at all? Why take that risk? She paused, allowing the committee to draw the final, devastating conclusion. Unless you were already living as husband and wife with Hirsi, having children with him, building a family with him, while being legally married to Elmi, which under Minnesota law is called bigamy, a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The word, bigamy, was the final, total indictment of the marriage arrangement. Several reporters literally stood up, knowing this was the headline. The political coup de grace. Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican, seized the moment, Formalizing the attack. Mr. Chairman, I move that we refer these matters to the Department of Justice for investigation. We have evidence presented here of potential federal tax fraud, potential immigration fraud, potential perjury, and potential bigamy. This committee has a duty. Point of order, Omar shouted, slamming her hand on the table. You can't refer allegations to justice. These are politically motivated attacks. They're not allegations, Gabbard said quietly, holding up the Campaign Finance Board ruling. At least some of them aren't. You were found guilty of misusing campaign funds. That's established fact. The tax fraud is documented by the Campaign Finance Board and their finding. The perjury is in your divorce filing, contradicted by photographic evidence. These aren't theories. These are documents. Your signatures, your statements, your actions. The door to the hearing room, which had seen two Democrats quietly slip out, now saw another, Representative Josh Gottheimer, start to return, only to freeze in the doorway, look at the screen displaying the tax fraud, and quietly turn around and leave again. The final line of political defense was crumbling into self-preservation. The petty pattern. Campaign finance violation, Part 1. But let's move on, Gabbard said, a hint of something almost merciful in her tone. The calmness of a doctor about to deliver the rest of the bad news. The case now pivoted to the undeniable truth of crimes already investigated, adjudicated, and confirmed by the state. Let's talk about the $250. She pulled out an official document with the seal of the state of Minnesota. The Graphic Visual Authority of the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board, CFB, findings and order. Let's discuss violations you've already been found guilty of committing. Officially on the record, admitted to by you and your campaign. Omar's eyes closed. She knew what was coming. Campaign finance fraud, Gabbard stated, placing the document on the projector. Where you used donor money meant for your campaign for personal travel, personal gain, personal benefit, where you were found guilty, where you were fined, where you had to pay back money you stole from people who trusted you. The document appeared on the screen. Its language official and unyielding. Findings. The board finds that the Omar Committee improperly paid for costs related to out-of-state travel by Representative Omar that was not connected to performing legislative duties. Order. Representative Ilhan Omar shall personally pay back to the committee $3.475. The committee shall pay a civil penalty of $500. Guilty, Gabbard finally said, the single word carrying the weight of the entire Minnesota state government. Not alleged, not accused, guilty. Found guilty by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board of using campaign donations for personal use. Ordered to pay back nearly $3.500 plus a $500 fine. She clicked to bring up another page, detailing the specific, damning expenditures, the petty larceny of public trust. Let's look at what you did with donor money. Money that came from teachers, nurses, small business owners who believed in you, who thought they were supporting your campaign. The list appeared. $600 airfare to New York for People for the American Way meeting, personal career advancement. Not legislative duty. Travel to Florida to accept honorarium, personal income. Not campaign related. $1.500 payment to accounting firm for personal tax preparation services. Gabbard seized upon the tax expense, connecting it directly back to the preceding tax fraud revelation. You used $1.500 in campaign funds to pay for your tax preparation, your personal taxes. Can you explain how that's a campaign expense? My accountant said it was allowed. Omar mumbled, now relying on the weakest defense possible, delegation of responsibility. The Campaign Finance Board said it wasn't. Gabbard countered, holding up the finding. They specifically ruled it was not a permitted non-campaign disbursement. Your campaign failed to meet its burden to prove it was allowed. These weren't honest mistakes, Congresswoman. This was a pattern. Gabbard played a short video testimony from the investigation, the ultimate humanization of the crime. An elderly woman appeared on screen, white-haired and earnest. I gave $27 to Ilhan's campaign. I'm a retired teacher on a fixed income. That $27 meant something to me. I gave it because I believed in her message. I didn't give it so she could fly to award ceremonies and build her national profile. I feel like I was robbed. The elderly woman's cracking voice provided the moral summation. This wasn't just a fine, it was a profound betrayal of small-dollar political trust. I paid that money back. I complied with the board's order. Omar interjected, desperate to reframe the narrative. You paid it back after you got caught. Gabbard cut in, her voice sharp for the first time. After the investigation, after the finding, after the board ordered you to pay it back. That's not compliance. That's getting caught and being forced to make it right. The systematic lack of integrity, from immigration to personal taxes to campaign spending, was now irrefutable. The money funnel. Campaign finance violation, Part 2. Having established the petty theft, Gabbard now moved to the grand scale of financial self-dealing, the funneling of hundreds of thousands of dollars to a man who became her spouse. But let's move on to the $250 plus, Gabbard said, bringing up a new number on the screen. This is how much your campaign paid to the E Street Group between August 2018 and September 2019. Tim Mynette's consulting firm. She brought up the timeline, highlighting the clear sequence of events that suggested a profound conflict of interest. August 2018 to September 2019. Continuous payments totaling over $250 to E Street Group. March 2020. Omar announces marriage to Tim Mynette. June 2020. Omar's campaign abruptly stops working with E Street Group. You paid $250,000 in campaign funds to a company owned by a man who became your husband. Gabbard stated flatly. During the period you were paying him, were you having a relationship with him? My personal relationships are none of your business, Omar retorted, retreating to her most common line of defense. They are when they involve campaign funds. Gabbard countered. The Federal Election Commission investigated whether you were using campaign money to pay for personal travel with Mynette. Whether the consulting services were real, or whether you were funneling campaign money to your boyfriend. She held up a document noting the FEC investigation. The FEC ultimately declined to find willful violation, but even you recognized how bad it looked because you severed ties with his firm right after you married him. The analysis was devastatingly simple. If the consulting was legitimate, why stop the moment the relationship became legal? If it was legitimate consulting, why stop? Why not keep working with him? The immediate cessation of payments was the most compelling evidence that the financial relationship was intertwined with the personal one. A classic self-dealing arrangement. Omar stared at the table, her jaw clenched, offering no defense. The confluence of the events, the $250,000 campaign expense, the personal relationship, the FEC scrutiny, and the abrupt end of the contract, spoke louder than any denial. Pattern, Gabbard said simply, organizing the voluminous documents into neat, distinct piles on the table, a visual representation of the catalog of corruption. Campaign funds to people close to you. Law firms doing work related to your potential immigration fraud. Tax preparers covering up your fraudulent filings. Your husband's consulting firm receiving $250,000. And all of it only stopping when you get caught. When investigations start. When people start asking questions. The narrative was now complete. The story had moved from an unverified political rumor to a mountain of documented evidence. Each piece confirming a systemic willingness to subvert legal and ethical standards for personal or familial gain. The political general, who began the day with a pre-scripted attack, was now entirely surrounded by her own documents. The final act was the total demolition of her persona. The traitor's mirror. Final accusation and collapse. Gabbard leaned back slightly, allowing the sheer volume and weight of the evidence, the stacks of folders on the table, to speak for itself. The room, which had been in a state of chaos and noise, was now gripped by a profound, heavy silence. Congresswoman Omar, Gabbard began, her voice regaining the solemn, unyielding cadence of the beginning. Let's review the record you created. Not the one your supporters manufactured, but the one you signed, dated, and swore to. She used a laser pointer to trace the evidence, moving methodically across the visual timeline that remained on the screen. You committed potential immigration fraud by allegedly marrying a family member to secure his U.S. status and financial aid. You committed potential bigamy by legally remaining married to one man while living and filing taxes with another. You committed documented federal tax fraud by filing false joint returns to save $8.500. You were found guilty of campaign finance violations, misusing donor money for your personal gain, and you funneled over $250,000 in donor money to the firm of the man who became your husband. This isn't alleged. This isn't a conspiracy, Gabbard stated, her voice carrying the finality of a courtroom judge. This is your documented, official record. This is a catalog of systematic dishonesty. A pattern of using public office and public funds for private, illicit, and possibly criminal gain. Omar's political armor was now completely shed. Her hands were shaking badly as she tried to adjust the slipping hijab. The nervous gesture revealing the raw panic beneath the facade. Sweat beaded on her forehead. She looked utterly defeated. Gabbard delivered the final, crushing irony, using Omar's own initial attack as the ultimate summation of her hypocrisy. You walked into this room today, Congresswoman, and you called me a traitor. You questioned my loyalty to this country, my service to its values. Gabbard held her gaze across the table, the moment stretching out, uncomfortable and total. So, I ask you one final time. What should we call someone who potentially defrauded the U.S. immigration system? Defrauded American taxpayers, committed a felony like bigamy under her state law, and misused the sacred trust of small, retired teachers who gave their last $27. No answer came. Omar's mouth worked, but no sound emerged. Now, the true political collapse began. In the gallery, several of Omar's most vocal progressive supporters were standing, not to cheer, but to leave. They moved quietly toward the exits, not wanting to be associated with what had been revealed. The activists who had cheered her earlier were now checking their phones. The troubled expressions confirming that the documents were real and the defense was a lie. The final, devastating defection occurred on the committee dais. Brad Sherman and Josh Gottheimer, the two moderate Democrats who had slipped out earlier, were now gone for good. Two more Democratic members stood and walked out through the back door. They didn't look at Omar as they left. The message was clear. Political protection was over. The party could no longer afford to defend a record so thoroughly and factually compromised. Omar sat completely alone at her table, her head bowed, her hands white-knuckled on the podium. The power she had wielded for 38 years in the progressive movement, the power of an unassailable moral identity, had been annihilated by the documents she tried to bury. The veteran had used truth as her weapon, and the elite was left defenseless, exposed, and utterly ruined.